It became simply unbearable. Too many hints, too many inconsistencies. Sally and I had been married for 12 years. When we got married, we had every reason to do so, but then everything changed. We both grew up, as they say. For me, that meant settling down and looking to the future. At least that's what I called it. Bar life was wearing me down. The loud music and drunk people were no longer fun. The music was so loud that I couldn't talk, and talking to people was important to me. Drunk people were just drunk. When I stopped drinking more than a couple of drinks a night, their stupid words and actions stopped being funny and witty and just became stupid and meaningless. I thought Sally agreed with me. She seemed to enjoy walks, quiet evenings at home, and gentle sex as much as I did. We stopped going to bars and started doing other things. She seemed to agree with me that quieter, less boisterous entertainment was just as enjoyable. God knows how much less my head hurt the next morning. At least, that's what I thought until her business trips became more frequent. She worked for a cosmetics company and regularly visited clients to promote and demonstrate new and improved products from their line. The commission trips increased from once every 3 to 4 months to the point where, in the last few months, I realized that Sally was flying out somewhere about every 3 weeks. As I began to think about it, I noticed that the nature of the trips had changed as well. At first, Sally would leave for the airport in the morning. Arriving at her destination before noon, she would meet with executives from the company she was visiting over lunch. After lunch, she would answer questions and demonstrate the benefits of the new and improved products. The next day, she would give demonstrations at leading boutiques and department stores, which usually lasted until the evening. Sometimes Sally would give an evening performance, but then she would fly home that same night. She always called me to meet her at the terminal upon arrival, regardless of the time. Now, she would fly out the night before and spend the next 2 days in meetings and demonstrations, probably just as she had before. But she would fly home in the morning or early afternoon after what I came to call her demonstration performances. At first, she would fly in for 2 days, arriving in the morning, staying overnight, and flying home the next day after lunch. Now she was staying for 3 nights and flying out in the morning of the 3rd day, and she didn't seem to want me to pick her up when she arrived. According to Sally, she knew I didn't want to take time off work regularly to pick her up. Now you're probably thinking that I suspected something was wrong because our sex life was suffering, but that wasn't the case. In fact, the nights she came back from her trips were some of the hottest of our lives. And that was one of the things that made me wonder. On some of those nights, she would get inventive. Some of her little quirks became part of our regular lovemaking. What made me seriously wonder about it a couple of months ago was that she wasn't answering when I called her in the evenings. She always called me right after our usual dinner, but she didn't answer when I tried to call her later, say, at 9 or 10:30. Once I called her after midnight, but I couldn't get through. She told me she was very tired after her flight and long days of working with clients and giving demonstrations. According to Sally, she simply didn't answer her phone. If I left her a message, she would call me back the next morning at work, usually around 8:15, right after I arrived. She explained that she needed to rest after her flight, so she flew out a day early. She said she wanted to avoid the inconvenience of late-night flights after a long and hard day of public demonstrations, so she stayed overnight. It all seemed perfectly logical, especially if you assumed that she didn't really want to be home with me. I felt terrible about my doubts, but I couldn't help wondering what had really happened during those 3 nights when she was away and out of contact. I cared deeply about her. Besides, Sally had given me no reason to doubt her love for me. But the situation bothered me. I was jealous and let it affect me, but I felt like I had a reason to be. I couldn't get it out of my head, and it was starting to affect our relationship, whether she realized it or not. Finally, I decided that I had to dispel my doubts, get rid of this burden, so to speak. But I couldn't tell Sally about my suspicions. If they turned out to be unfounded, She would be very angry with me for suspecting her. If they turned out to be true, she would be angry and afraid. Either way, the questions would remain, and nothing would change except that my wife would be angry with me. I felt I had to make sure that my fears were just empty speculation, but she couldn't find out that I was doing this. So when the last trip was scheduled, I arranged for a few days off with my boss. Then I told Sally that I needed to visit one of our suppliers while she was away. I promised to call her at the hotel at the time we usually talked, as I probably wouldn't be back until morning and wouldn't be able to answer her call. Sally flew to Phoenix late in the afternoon. I booked a flight for the morning and arrived early enough to check into the hotel where she always stayed. After changing into clothes she wouldn't recognize, I returned to the airport in a rental car. When she got off the plane, I was standing at the exit in casual clothes, wearing a bright baseball cap and reading the National Enquirer. A tall, handsome man met Sally at the exit and hugged her warmly. I recognized him from a company banquet a couple of years ago. He was the owner of a local distributor for a line of cosmetics that Sally was going to demonstrate. I let them go ahead and headed for the baggage claim area, watching from a distance as they picked up my wife's suitcase. I easily caught up with them and made it to the hotel where Sally and I were staying. I changed into a sports jacket. When my wife entered, I sat off to the side in the hotel lobby and watched her check in. After getting their keys, they both got into the elevator. The man looked tired after a long day. His hair was tousled and wouldn't stay in place. He looked tired, but also very happy to be with Sally. When the elevator doors closed, it was just them and another couple. I watched the floor numbers. The elevator stopped on the 4th and 15th floors. Now I knew that Sally's room was on the 4th or 15th floor. I assumed her room was on the 15th, as she usually chose rooms with a view. 45 minutes later, they were still there, and I started biting my nails. But in the end, it was a business trip, and there was nothing unusual about them discussing the details of Sally's performances for the next 2 days. Glancing at my watch, I saw that it was already 6:15, and it was a little late for an evening call. I walked over to a payphone, dialed the hotel number, and asked to be connected to my wife. The phone rang at least 10 times before the operator came back on the line and said the number was unavailable. I hung up and my stomach started to rumble. I went into a souvenir shop, bought a book on the latest advances in self-improvement, picked up a local newspaper, and returned to my spot where I could watch the elevators. Almost 3 hours later, I recognized the man who came out of the elevator with Sally. He looked better than when I saw him at the airport. In fact, the man walking through the lobby looked like someone who had just taken a shower and had a good night's sleep. His hair was perfectly styled and even looked slightly damp. He definitely didn't look like someone who had just spent 4 hours discussing business. Telling myself not to jump to conclusions, I tossed the self-help book I had been reading into the trash can and went to the payphone to call again. There was still no answer in Sally's room. Returning to my room, I got ready for bed, lay down, and stared at the ceiling. I'm sure I fell asleep that night, but I don't know when or how long it took. It seemed like I tossed and turned all night, staring at the ceiling or out the window. The next morning, after showering, I changed my hairstyle with washable hair dye and put on clothes that my wife wouldn't associate with her husband. Back in the lobby, I called my wife's room again from a payphone. Again, no one answered, but I left a message saying that I had been trying to reach her, that I wouldn't be in the office that day, but that I would call her in the evening after dinner. I knew that her workday would be busy, so I spent the day exploring the city. I was in the lobby when Sally returned that evening. I watched her enter the elevator alone. Then I sat down to wait. After waiting 20 minutes, I went to the payphone and called her. She answered almost immediately, sounding a little out of breath. After telling me she loved me, Sally said she had just returned to her room after a hard day. We chatted about how our days had gone. Mine was pretty made up. She said she was very tired and planned to have dinner at the hotel, then go to bed and maybe read. Whether she planned to read or not, she was going to go to bed early because she had a busy day of demonstrations the next day. I told her I had tried to call her the day before. Sally explained that she had been met at the airport by the owner of the company that distributes their products in the Phoenix area. They had gone straight to his office, and she had checked into the hotel quite late. She warned me that by our time she might be back at the hotel late and not to be upset if she wasn't home when I called tomorrow evening. After that lie, I felt awkward and sank into a chair in the lobby to read the newspaper before dinner. My mood was completely ruined when, 45 minutes later, the elevator doors opened and Sally stepped out arm in arm with a man I had never seen before. They were chatting and joking, flirting quite openly, and he patted her on the butt very familiarly as they turned away from me and headed for the parking lot. My rental car was parked on a one-way street in front of the hotel. I hurried to my car, got behind the wheel, and waited. From where I was sitting, I could see the exit from the hotel parking lot. 5 minutes later, I recognized Sally and her companion as they drove out. Carefully following them, I drove to a steakhouse outside of town. After parking, I waited while they had dinner. And then I realized for the first time that I hadn't really expected to find her here, since I hadn't planned on dinner while I was following her. I knew I was in a pretty depressed state if following her to a steakhouse seemed like fun. An hour and a half passed before they came out. They were giggling and talking loudly. It was obvious to me that my beloved wife had had a few glasses of wine with her dinner. From that moment on, my evening went downhill. They drove to a noisy bar. After waiting 10 minutes, I followed them inside and sat down at the bar where I could see the entire room. They were easy to spot, as they were probably the loudest couple in the place. Sally and her companion were dancing, drinking, kissing in front of everyone, and having the time of their lives. Everyone sitting near them was involved in their fun, and it looked like one big party. One thing was obvious. My wife was very close to her companion. Sitting quietly at the bar, I tried to sip my drink. To my complete surprise, a very attractive woman approached me and struck up a conversation. She was cheerful and sweet, but something didn't add up. I somehow figured out that she worked at the bar and was keeping an eye out for potential troublemakers. I didn't fit in with the crowd of drinking patrons, and her job was to prevent an incident before it started. In the end, she decided that I was a lonely man trying to get over a broken heart. To cheer me up, she pointed out the happiest couple in the room, my wife and her companion. She told me that the woman had come here several times alone, but just 3 weeks ago, Randy, the man she was with now, had driven her home. She had seemed quite unhappy and lonely then, but look at them now. I thanked her for her help, told her I felt better, and that I'd better go home and get some sleep. She had been a great help to me. I returned to the hotel, changed my clothes, and decided to have a cup of coffee in the hotel cafe. I happened to sit where I could see the elevators. Less than 15 minutes later, I saw Sally and her companion entering the elevator to go up to the 15th floor. Before the doors closed, she hugged him, and the last thing I saw that evening was my wife kissing him, the most erotic kiss I had ever seen. When the doors closed, the receptionists giggled as they discussed the scene. There was serious doubt that they were still standing when they reached the 15th floor. I guessed that Sally wanted to show him the view. Now that I knew what car her date was driving, I headed for the parking lot and found it easily. Shining my keychain flashlight through the windows, I spotted an envelope in a manila folder with Randy Hansen's address on it. Now I knew her date's name. But what good did that do me? Out of curiosity, I returned to the payphones to look in the Phoenix phone book. As expected, Mr. Randy Hansen was listed. Randy and Barbara Hansen were listed. Looking at my watch, I saw that it was already after 11, but I dialed the number anyway. The phone rang 7 times before a woman finally answered. I asked if I could speak to Randy. She said he had gone out to dinner with an important client and wouldn't be back until early the next morning. I apologized and said I had a problem but didn't realize how late it was. I said I would call back in the morning and hung up. Now I was pretty upset and called Sally on her extension. The phone rang a dozen times before I hung up. Going up to my lonely room, I waited another 20 minutes and called her again, letting the phone ring. After waiting half an hour, I dialed the number again and let the phone ring. Then I waited another half hour before calling again. On about the 12th call, Sally picked up, sounding slightly drunk and very annoyed. Speaking through a towel pressed against the phone and trying to sound drunk, I made her an indecent proposal. Sally gasped, and I heard the phone being yanked out of her hands. An angry male voice came on the line, warning me to leave the lady alone or he would kick my ass. I paused, then decided, "Oh, sorry, Randy. I didn't know you were with Sally tonight. Tell her hi. I'll call her later." Then I hung up and went to bed. Needless to say, I didn't sleep that night either. The next morning, I decided I had nothing left to do in Phoenix. I checked out of the hotel early, probably before my wife woke up. I drove to the airport, got on the first plane in the right direction, and by noon, I was home. I didn't call Sally that evening. If she wasn't home, there was no point, and if she was home, my call would have made her wonder. To my surprise, I woke up early from a restless sleep and the sound of a taxi pulling up outside the house. Sally was dragging her bag into the house. I met her in the living room as she was hanging up her coat. She stood there looking at me, looking very tired and upset, then rushed over and hugged me. I hugged her formally, burying my face in her neck so she couldn't kiss me. My God, what a surprise! "Did your boyfriend kick you out?" I asked, pulling away from her and trying to sound at least half joking. "My boyfriend lives here," she replied, clinging to me even tighter. "Maybe I can talk him into letting me sleep in his bed." "You must be tired, Sally. Why don't you get some sleep?" I said. I was just about to get up and make breakfast. "Would you like something to eat before you take a nap? You don't have to be in town until noon, so no one will be waiting for you at work. Take advantage of the opportunity to rest. I've noticed that these business trips really wear you out." Sally looked at me intently. "What about me, dear? I'd like a cup of tea while you eat. Is something wrong? You seem distracted." "We need to talk, Sally, but let me eat first. Are you sure you don't want anything?" Although I had no appetite, I decided it would be better to eat something now. Judging by the way my life was going, I wouldn't be hungry later, and if I waited for my appetite to return, I might starve to death. I put the kettle on and made some eggs with sausage and toast. While the sausage was frying, I poured orange juice for Sally and myself. Sally sat silently, sipping her tea while I ate. I knew we would talk soon, but I didn't want to. I was determined to do what I had to do, but I just didn't want to. After I had struggled to eat the tasteless food, I leaned back in my chair and looked at my wife. She was still one of the most attractive women I had ever met. Bright, intelligent, and witty, she had been a pleasure to spend time with all these years. At moments like this, I missed smoking. Neither of us wanted to start the conversation, and a cigarette, or better yet, a pipe, would have been very comforting right now. Finally, I said, "We need to talk, Sally. Let's go to the living room. It's more comfortable there. Better yet, go take a shower, wash off your fatigue, and when you're ready, come back." Sally got up silently and headed for the bedroom, taking her suitcase with her. When she came back in her bathrobe, she looked fresher, but there were wrinkles and shadows on her face that I hadn't noticed before. She glanced at the clock and asked, "Aren't you going to work today?" "No, I took the whole week off," I replied. She looked at me intently, piecing together the different facts. We sat in silence for a few minutes, studying each other, not wanting to speak. "Sally, did you know that Randy was married?" I asked. She flinched and her face turned pale. We sat and stared at each other for a while longer. "What was his name?" I began again. "Your contact at Lady Cosmetics. Wasn't it Conrad? Conrad Jones? I remember you once told me he was gay. Is that true?" Sally flinched again and sighed unevenly. Her eyes were wide and fixed on me. She still hadn't said a word. I let the silence hang in the air. In the quiet living room, it grew louder and louder. Finally, I shrugged mentally and decided to get it over with. I didn't want to do this. "Honey," I said, looking at the floor, "I love you, and I probably always will. But I can only believe that you don't want to get married. At least not to me." Sally sighed sharply and started to speak, but I just ignored her and continued. "We discussed what marriage meant to us before our relationship became serious, when we were just dating. At the time, I thought I was infringing on your femininity. We agreed that when two people make a lifelong commitment, it's a contract. No open marriage, because that kind of marriage means that most of the promises won't be kept, whether it's commitment, fidelity, call it what you will. At the time, we believed that each partner should be willing to meet the other's needs. If that was impossible, we agreed to talk about it. If those needs were deemed reasonable, we believed that the person who wasn't meeting them wasn't willing or able to truly commit to the marriage. If one partner couldn't or wouldn't meet the other's needs, it was time to seriously consider whether we should stay together." I lifted my head and just looked at her. Tears were streaming down Sally's face, and she covered her face with her hands. "Vernon, I love you. I'm sorry. We can talk. You can help me. Please, Vernon." "Sally, did I not meet any of your needs? Was I a bad husband?" She shook her head vigorously. Tears filled my eyes. I tried to hold them back. "Sally, I trusted you completely. Now I wonder how long it took me to see the truth, but I'm sure you've been using your trips for entertainment for a long time. I'm not asking you to tell me when it started. I definitely don't want to know the whole story. It doesn't matter how long you've been cheating on me. What matters is that you did it. I couldn't believe what I saw, and I was so ashamed of my suspicions that I felt the need to prove that my suspicions were wrong. Sally, I was there when Conrad Jones met you in Phoenix. I saw you get into the elevator. I called you when you didn't answer, and I saw him leave the hotel a few hours after the two of you went up to your room. He looked rested, as if he had just gotten out of the shower. The next day you told me he had never been in your room." Looking at Sally, I saw tears running down her cheeks. "Sally, I was in the lobby when I called you the night before last, when you told me you were very tired and were going straight to bed after dinner at the hotel restaurant. I was in the lobby, maybe 45 minutes after you came down with Randy. I was parked in the steakhouse parking lot while you had dinner with Randy and got a little drunk. When you went to the bar, I followed you and watched you dance and kiss him. A woman pointed at you as a beautiful couple. She said he had met you on a previous trip and that it was wonderful to see two people who loved each other so much. I was in the cafe when you two got into the elevator. Everyone who saw you wondered if you made it to your room before having sex, and most of them discussed it loudly and giggled. I checked Randy's car, found his home phone number, and called Barbara, his wife. She said she was home alone and that he had gone out to dinner with an important client. I called you while you were entertaining Randy in his room. Randy threatened to beat me up for bothering a lady. How long was that, Sally? It must have been around 2 in the morning. I just sat there looking at my wife. Her face was pale, tears streaming down her cheeks. Vernon, my God, forgive me. I don't know why I did it. Please, it won't happen again. You're my husband, my love. We've built a life together, and that's all I want. Our life together is my real life. For some reason, I thought what I was doing was a game, and it would never become part of my real life. What can I do to make up for what I've done? Anything, just tell me. Woman, I can't think of anything that could make up for what you've done. You got bored, and your curiosity about someone else's little fleshy tube made you completely betray me. A man invades a woman with that tube. When we say he takes her, it's appropriate. You asked me many times to take you, to invade you, to conquer you. There are women who behave like dominatrixes. They actually take on the traditional male role, but that's not you. You allowed yourself, my most precious possession, to belong to another man. I have carefully, sometimes painfully, kept my vow to you, and kept your man exclusively yours. I agreed and still agree that a man is his wife's property to the same extent that a woman is her husband's property. I have kept that vow. Looking into her eyes, I added, I have to ask, Sally. You never gave me any indication that I wasn't satisfying you in bed or in any other area of our life together. You made me believe that it was impossible to satisfy you more than I did, but at the same time, you made some improvements in our sex life. I don't think that's a bad thing, but now I'm curious where you found these new little touches. Was I really not enough for you? Sally sobbed. No, Vernon, never. You're the best lover I've ever had. I just got tired of leaving so often. Please, honey, what can I do to make it up to you? Just tell me. I'll never do anything like that again. It was just to pass the time. It just happened. I love you. I've never loved anyone but you. I don't think I could ever love anyone else. Sally, I can't think of anything that would allow me to trust you. Thank God we don't have children. I'll move out as soon as I find an apartment. Fortunately for us, we lived on one salary and put the rest in the bank, so you shouldn't have any financial difficulties, just like me. But now is not the time to discuss the division of property. But for the record, when the time comes, I would like to split everything in half. I sighed and said, If you're serious about saving our marriage, we can stay in touch. Continuing, If you're serious about saving our marriage, don't go on dates. I'm not going to make any promises to myself. Right now, the very thought of any kind of relationship with anyone makes me shiver. Your success in not sleeping with other people is much worse. Sally, I'm going for a walk. I can sleep in the guest bedroom until I find an apartment. Maybe later today we can go to the bank and open separate accounts, at least for savings. But we can discuss the details later if you want. Then I took my coat and left the house for a long walk. I didn't want her to see my tears. I should have seen it coming. Life was too perfect, especially in that moment. It was a Friday night on a beautiful summer day. My beer was ice cold as it slid down my throat. The Cubs were beating the Cardinals on the big screen by a score of 7-2 in the fifth inning. My faithful German Shepherd Rice lay curled up next to me and mostly asleep, waking up and opening her eyes only when I let out a cheer for the Cubs' success. Except for the TV and my occasional shouts of joy, the house was quiet. My wife Tracy was visiting a neighbor, and my 18-year-old son and 17-year-old daughter had both spent the night visiting friends. It was just me and the dog, cabins, and a box of Corona in the fridge. Oh yes, and limes. I didn't mess around with limes much, but I bought a couple this afternoon when I knew I'd be alone tonight. Feels good. I heard the front door open and close and assumed it was my wife returning from a visit to her longtime friend Lisa. I heard her moving around the front of the house, but I didn't hear her call out a greeting as she usually did. It seemed a little odd to me, but just then Cubs manager David Ross brought out his starting pitcher in the fourth inning when the Cubs had a big lead, causing me to explode with anger and once again wake the dog. It must have been at least 5 minutes before Tracy finally made it to the living room. She looked pensive and probably nervous. She didn't walk over to my chair and lean in for a kiss like she usually did, but instead sat down on the edge of the couch to the left of my chair. I watched her with one eye while the other followed the game. "Can we talk for a minute, Bob?" she asked in a voice I could barely hear over the noise of the TV. By now she had my full attention. "Sure," I answered. I noticed that her forehead was dripping with sweat, and she seemed to be breathing erratically. I wondered if someone we knew was sick or dead. "Can you turn off the TV, Bob?" she asked, clenching and unclenching her fists. "Turn off the TV in the middle of a Cubs game?" She knew what she was asking. It had to be something serious. Death, not illness. I got an uncomfortable feeling in my lower abdomen. I grabbed the remote and turned off the sound. "What's wrong, baby? You don't look so good. Did somebody die?" "Oh, God, no, no one died," she answered quickly. "It's just really important to me, and I need to make sure you're listening to me completely." I nodded without saying anything. A traffic jam of bad thoughts formed in my brain. We sat staring at each other for at least half a minute. There was fear and something else in her eyes. Maybe anger. "You know that I love you completely, and I would never cheat on you. I would never go behind your back and date another man, would I?" That wasn't exactly the question I was expecting. Suddenly, the dinner I'd eaten earlier in the evening and the 2 glasses of beer I'd had during the game seemed to want to come back, right there on the living room floor. I nodded silently again. "I'm 45 years old, Bob. I've only slept with one man in my entire life besides you," she began. "I'm still an attractive woman. My friends even say I'm a hot mommy. I want to sleep with another man just once so I can feel the thrill of meeting a new man, another man one more time before you and I grow old together. What the hell is this?" I sat still. I don't know how long. It sounded like a speeding train passing right by my ears. "No, no, absolutely not," I shouted back, jumping up from my chair. "It's not going to happen while I'm breathing." She stared at me wide-eyed as I paced back and forth. It must have been a bad dream. I must have fallen asleep in my chair and found myself in the middle of a nightmare. "This has nothing to do with you and me, Bob. It's all about me, my needs as a woman, above everything else about you and our family," she said, and her voice seemed to grow stronger and more confident as she spoke. "I think I've been a pretty good wife and mother all these years. I always put family first. I need to do something for myself this time. I need to do it to feel like a sexy woman in control of her life." "Don't you feel like a sexy woman with me?" I asked, realizing I sounded like a whiny loser. "I tell you, I love you all the time. I think I show you that you are a sexy woman all the time. I still desire you, and I'm pretty sure I don't hide it too much." "You do, and I like it, but it's about something else. My ego still needs validation. By men other than you, Bob. It's nice to be noticed by other men. It's wonderful to think another man would want me that way. Doesn't it feel good when you see a woman looking at you or flirting with you? I'm no different from anyone else. I like to be looked at, with desire. And after all this time, I want more. I'd like to experience going on a date, getting drunk on wine and dinner, so to speak, and then another man picks you up and desires you. Just for one night. Not love, just desire. One night. Then I'd come home to you and be a simple wife and mother for the rest of my life." "You're anything but a simple wife and mother to me, Blondie," I objected. "You're everything to me. I can't let you go to another man. I won't let you go to another man. You keep telling me you love me. Why don't you show me how much you love me by giving me this? I know it's a big ask, the biggest, and it would be the greatest gift to me if you would let me," she declared. "No, it would be the greatest folly of me to let you. If you really loved me, you wouldn't even ask," I said. "Have I not been a good wife to you and a good mother to our children? Shouldn't that entitle me to a free ride? You had a lot more women than I had men before we were married. I'm just trying to even the score a little bit," she said. "In fact, we never really discussed numbers before we got married. All we really discussed was how we both believed in fidelity after we got married. And for your information, I've only slept with 4 women in my life, including you. Not exactly a long list," I said. "Oh, I always thought so. You have a lot more experience than I do," she said. "You know a lot more than I do. I read a lot on the subject. I want to give you as much pleasure as possible." "So it's still difficult for you to say yes?" she asked. "Not only is it an emphatic no, but I'm meeting with a lawyer first thing Monday morning to start the divorce proceedings," I said as the shock reflected on her face. But, but, she stammered. "I understand how hard it must have been for you to ask for a pass, so this tells me that you're really serious about this. It tells me that you're not going to let it go that easily," I said. "It means that you're going to end up going behind my back to get your way. I don't believe you won't do it anymore, unless you've already done it, and it was just a smokescreen to get an ex post facto authorization." "No, I swear to you that I haven't slept with anyone up until now. I said I wouldn't cheat on you, and I meant it," she whimpered. "But you would think that now that I know you want it, doing it now wouldn't be cheating," I said, looking straight at her. Her inability to hold my gaze told me everything I needed to know. "You want to destroy our family even though I haven't done anything yet?" she asked hoarsely. "If you've finally gotten up the courage to ask, it means you've been planning this for a long time. And that tells me that you've already picked a target. He probably had a part in planning this too. Lunches? Dinners? You've already cheated on me, at least emotionally." "Who is he, by the way?" I asked. "I didn't pick anyone in particular," she said, staring at a point on the wall over my shoulder. The silence lasted about 15 seconds while I drilled a hole in her with my gaze. She turned bright red as she looked up at me and realized I was looking at her with disbelief on my face. "You don't need to know, Bob," she said quietly. "You're right. I don't need to know. But I do want to know the name of the man who is destroying what I thought was a beautiful marriage. You can tell me, or I can call all your close friends and your boss and all your coworkers and ask them," I said. Her mouth dropped open in shock. You wouldn't," she started to say. "I wouldn't. What do I have to lose? My life is in the gutter and my marriage has fallen apart. What should I be embarrassed about?" "What about my embarrassment?" she shrieked. I shrugged and tried my best to hide a smile. "Name?" I asked sharply. "Dan. Dan Wilson," she said quietly. "Please, Bob, don't hurt him. I'm not guaranteeing anything." I grabbed the remote and turned the game back on. She hummed, brushed away her tears, got up off the couch, and went upstairs to our bedroom. My eyes watched the rest of the Cubs game, but nothing registered in my brain. I can't even tell you what appeared on the screen after the game, but I know I sat in front of the TV for at least another 2 hours. While I think I did a pretty good job hiding most of my feelings from my wife, I was actually devastated. I had no idea that my wife was planning to sleep with another man. In retrospect, I suppose I should have noticed signs of her dissatisfaction with me, or her life, or something else. Over the past 3 months, Tracy had become somewhat aloof, not only from me, but also from our children. In fact, my daughter Sherry was the first to notice this, asking me if Tracy and I were having a fight. I noticed that the intimacy between us had also decreased. Sex 2 or 3 times a week had dwindled to once every 2 weeks, and not because I wasn't trying. I wondered if there were some early changes going on with her. Then there were the phone calls that were taken outside the room, which almost never happened until recently, in addition to the almost constant evening text messages. When I asked about it, she claimed it was Lisa, who was having problems with her husband Jerry. This was more than interesting because Jerry and Lisa lived just 3 houses down from us, and I had no idea they were having any problems. I spent the rest of the weekend intensely considering my options. I told Tracy that I was going to file for divorce as soon as possible, but first I needed to examine every aspect of this, my marriage and my family. I could certainly understand how another man could feel desire for my Tracy. She was a beauty when I met her, when we were both 21, and at 45, she was only 5 pounds heavier, despite having 2 children. Her good-sized boobs matched her firm ass, and her face made her look more like a 35-year-old. I always wondered how it was that I came to know Tracy. She was clearly above my pay grade. Not that I'm a troll or anything, I'm decent looking, but guys who look like me don't often meet the prom queen she was just 3 years ago as a senior in high school. In junior high, we both took the same astronomy class at Purdue University. I took it just for fun, while Tracy needed the course to fulfill her science requirements. In that sense, I am somewhat of a nerd, and Tracy realized pretty quickly that I would be happy to help her pass the exam since science was not her strong suit. It was nearing the end of the first semester, and we were studying in my dorm room when Tracy leaned over to me and kissed me hard on the lips. I kissed her back just as hard. "Damn it, for most of the semester I thought you were gay," Tracy told me when we broke the kiss. "No matter what outfit I wore, you never seemed interested." I was interested, but I wouldn't have thought it was mutual. I was just trying my best not to drool in front of you, I said. We were exceptional right away. I didn't have much sexual experience, but I assumed she had even less because she never complained and seemed quite happy with everything I tried in bed, thanks to my insatiable reading on the subject. While all the other guys my age were watching adult movies, I was reading about the action that everyone was watching. With Tracy, it came in handy right from the start. When she opened her eyes 2 minutes later, all she could mutter was, "I love you, Bob." We were married 2 years after graduation. 3 years later, our son came along, followed by a daughter. Financially, we were living pretty well, as I was an IT professional and she was working in a bank when she went back to work, shortly after our youngest went to school. Our son was getting ready to enter Ohio State University as a freshman in a couple months, and our daughter was about to move on to high school. In 2 short years, we were going to be orphans. We had spent the last few months discussing plans for our future, including traveling. I had loved this woman for almost 23 years. On the one hand, giving it up because she asked permission to cheat seemed overly harsh, but on the other hand, I had already noted that the fact that she went to the point of asking for permission to cheat was a serious problem. I wasn't born yesterday. I knew that if she was so desperate to ask to be allowed to cheat, she would be desperate enough to go behind my back, especially since she had already told me about it and didn't see it as cheating, although I did. Of course, there was also the issue that she and Dan Wilson were already having an emotional affair and they were planning this night of physical infidelity together. Would I ever be able to forgive that? I called my divorce attorney first thing Monday morning and made an appointment for Thursday afternoon. Meanwhile, on the home front, Tracy was trying her best to convince me not to file for divorce. "We haven't done anything, Bob. We're not going to do anything," Tracy cried. "Because you don't want a divorce, or because you know it's wrong?" I asked. She didn't look at me and didn't answer. "You're still hoping I'll change my mind and let you, aren't you?" This elicited a hopeful look from her, which unfortunately sealed our fates. I sent Tracy to court a week after meeting with my attorney. We lived in an affluent state and made about the same amount of money, so finances were easy. The kids were barely home, so housing issues were worked out as we went along, and the non-custodial parent was responsible for child support for 1 year. We would sell the house and split the proceeds. Boom, the case is done. 21 years is over. Not so fast. Tracy hired a pretty savvy attorney who convinced the judge to order 4 sessions of counseling and more if she deemed it necessary. The counselor, a woman in her mid-30s, was of the same opinion as my children and Tracy. Since my wife had not actually committed adultery, why did I feel that divorce was my only option? I told the counselor the same thing I told Tracy and my children, that I considered her request to have sex outside of our marriage tantamount to breaking our vows. Because of that, I no longer trusted her as a marriage partner. I may still love her to some degree, but I couldn't stay married to a woman I couldn't trust. "But I'll never try something like that again, Bob. I don't want anyone but you. Please," she begged over and over again for the better part of 2 sessions. "You'll never change your mind, will you, Mr. Rasmussen? I can see it in your eyes," the counselor said near the end of the 2nd session. "I'm going to put an end to this farce and tell the judge to grant the divorce unimpeded. My personal opinion doesn't matter, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. I think you're making a huge mistake. Your wife didn't cheat on you, at least not physically. So it sounds like you'd like to get marriage counseling to keep your marriage together for the long haul. Your wife seems willing to make any concessions you want to make to save your marriage and your family." I know I wrinkled my nose and sighed. I loved Tracy to death. I made that decision without flipping a coin. "There's a difference between the way you and I look at things, Dr. Baker. You called it a concession. I don't think her Pledge of Allegiance is a concession. I think it's called honoring the wedding vows she made to me 21 years ago that she planned to break with another man," I explained. My in-laws on my wife's side practically had a stroke when Tracy told them about the divorce. My mother-in-law called me the next day and shouted insults for a good 15 minutes, taking only one breath during the entire denunciation. She started yelling right after I said hello. My father-in-law, who has always been a more rational person, took the phone away from her while she was still screaming. "She didn't even cheat on you and you divorce her? After 21 years? Are you out of your mind, Bob?" he yelled. I gave him my version of what had happened, and I could hear him making quiet, strangled noises as I told him. Every now and then he would quietly utter, "Really?" and then I would continue. At the end of the conversation, he seemed much more depressed in spirit. Finally, he said, "Sorry, Bob," and quietly hung up. The next week, I moved into a neighboring two-bedroom apartment. My daughter had decided to live in the house with my wife for the next year until she went to college, but I thought the second room would come in handy if either of the kids wanted to stay for a while. They were both upset with me, although they seemed to understand why I was divorcing their mother. I had a friendly phone conversation with my neighbor, Jerry, a few days after I moved into my apartment. I informed him that his wife, Lisa, had a hand in my wife's plans with Dan Wilson, and that Tracy claimed that he and Lisa were having marital problems. I told him that I didn't think he had anything to do with the breakup of my marriage, but that his wife was somehow involved, and given how close she and Tracy were, was Lisa looking for a young stud to fuck too? "Oh, shit," Jerry wheezed through the phone. "So you're telling me I could get in trouble too? Is your lawyer giving out group rates?" The social media phenomenon has both positive and negative aspects. For me, the positive side was getting all sorts of information about a certain Dan Wilson without even having to hire a private investigator. Saved me a lot of money. Wilson was a co-worker of Lisa's and had transferred to the local office from Cleveland about 6 months before my marriage broke up. He had a very pretty fiancée who was still looking for a job in our town, so he came home almost every weekend to see her. Apparently, he was trying to arrange something with my wife for the time he was in town so he could have a warm, welcoming pussy in both places. I wondered if Tracy even knew about the guy's fiancée. Now all was lost. Except for the phone call I made to Wilson's fiancée. Shortly thereafter, I heard from some sources that Dan's wedding had been canceled, and his fiancée said he could spend full time with his old lady. Did I mention that his fiancée was the daughter of a very wealthy man? 2 weeks before the divorce was finalized, it was the 22nd anniversary of his marriage to Tracy. I had to admit that I was hurting inside because of what I had lost, but the longer I sat in front of dinner at Swanson TV, the more I realized I was doing the right thing. I would have spent the rest of my life looking for evidence that she was cheating on me if I had stayed married. I knew with every fiber of my being that sooner or later she would find a way to cheat on me. She hated losing at anything and viewed not getting her way as a loss that needed to be rectified. I had a shot of single malt whiskey and was in bed by 10 p.m. Happy anniversary to me. My phone rang around 1 a.m. and I noticed it was my soon-to-be ex-wife. I thought about switching it to voicemail, but since I was already awake, I answered the call. Oh, hell yes, she wailed, obviously in the throes of finishing. I'd heard those sounds often enough to know she wasn't faking it. There was another unintelligible squeal before Tracy urged her partner, presumably Wilson, to fuck her harder. I should have ended the conversation immediately, but I froze in place. I listened for another 2 minutes, long enough to hear Tracy's lover growl with his own discharge. Then I hung up before they started cooing to each other after sex, wishing I was on the landline so she could hear me tossing the receiver. If I had even the slightest doubt that I was doing the right thing, it would have decided our fate. On the advice of my attorney, I made it a habit to record every conversation I had with my wife. As I sat there, feeling like my blood pressure was about to skyrocket, I dialed my in-law's number, and when my father-in-law confirmed his presence, I pressed play on my phone's recording app. I let it play for a full 3 minutes, then ended the call. I was pretty sure this little one-act play would not be repeated in the future. Unlike my wife, I didn't use the charms of others until the divorce became official, and even then I hadn't gotten a woman into bed in over a year. I admit that I had difficulties in my social life. It's been 24 years since I last went on a date, and since I never planned to date again, I didn't keep track of dating events. Silly me. It turned out to be a failed strategy because the dating world certainly blew past me like a freight train on speed. I knew that part of my reluctance to date was in my head. I was afraid of being caught off guard again. I loved Tracy, and I had never anticipated what would happen to me. Not even a hint. The one thing that was easy to see that had changed since the last time I dated was the attitudes of women. When I dated, it was one-sided. A man picked a target. The man asked said target out on a date. If said target said yes, the man picked an activity and paid for everything. These days, women seem to be the hunter almost half the time, or at least thinking about how the date should go. Sometimes they even paid for everything. There were moments when I felt like a dinosaur trying to chase a cheetah. The dating scene showed me that Tracy's sudden selfishness was not unicorn behavior. Along with feeling more powerful, today's dating women are definitely more self-centered. Many of them wanted their own, even to the detriment of their partners. If it was good for them, it was good for their partners and their significant others. Been there, done that, and it's all very recent. I'm not going to complain about the physical aspects of having sex with a woman in her 20s. Okay, the first few times women nearly killed me, I was pretty sure I pulled a muscle. However, once I got used to the physical intimacy, the pleasure level was off the charts. I'm not saying Tracy wasn't good in bed, but in her 45s, she didn't have the energy and flexibility of a 20-year-old girl. Of course, I didn't have the regenerative powers of a 20-year-old man either, but my tongue and finger ability served me well while my partner and I waited for my tool to recover. It wasn't just about younger women, though. I've dated, and slept with, women from about 25 to 55. I guess you could call me an equal opportunity enthusiast. However, I always looked for women around my age first, so to speak, in my comfort zone. It had been a rough week, and after finishing a meeting with a new client across town, I walked into the bar of an upscale hotel, still dressed in my suit. I sat down on a high stool at the bar and ordered a serving of Glenmorangie single malt. It was about 7 p.m. when I walked in, and about an hour later a group of women from the bachelorette party were seated at tables marked reserved. There must have been about 15 of them, and they were all acting pretty rowdy. I decided to stick around for a bit and watch the fun, so I ordered food from the bar. The bride-to-be was, of course, the star of the show, and I noticed that she was a pretty girl of about 25 with light brown hair down to her waist and big brown eyes. I admit I'm a fan of long hair, so she kind of grabbed me, and I focused on her for a few minutes before I started paying attention to the other party-goers. That's when I noticed her. I assumed she was in her early 40s, and I could tell from her age that she was the companion for the evening. An older hen who was taken along to look after the innocent, and not so innocent, younger chicks. The first thing I noticed was that she seemed a little nervous in her mid-thigh-length black skirt, which seemed to scoot a little higher on her legs as she sat in the chair. Several times during the first few minutes, she tried unsuccessfully to pull her skirt down. I smiled to myself. She really did have nice legs. She also seemed to have impressive breasts, not quite hidden under the tight lavender-colored silk blouse she was wearing. The blouse had a V neckline, with the neckline reaching down to the middle of her large breasts and showing that her alabaster skin wasn't often exposed to the sun. When she wasn't worrying about the length of her skirt, she was looking down at her breasts. I assumed to make sure there wasn't too much creamy skin showing. Her whole outfit was probably a bit youthful for her comfort, and I assumed it had been sewn for her by one of the younger women in the group. I mentally complimented whoever had picked it out and convinced her to wear it. The women definitely seemed to be enjoying themselves, laughing, drinking, and eating, and when the three-piece combination played, several women got up and started dancing with each other. The women dancing together seemed to encourage the other men at the bar, who started approaching the women on the dance floor and those sitting at the table, with the exception of their companion. I waited for about 10 minutes, and when no one moved toward the companion, I decided the way was clear and headed toward her. She had shoulder-length dark brown hair and bright green eyes that reminded me of Jacqueline Bisset in her heyday. Just as importantly, she wasn't wearing a wedding ring. She flushed a gorgeous pink blush when I asked her to dance. She hesitated at first, but then agreed, and several young women sitting nearby expressed their sorrow for her as she stood up, pulled down her skirt, and took my hand. The first two dances were fast, and I had to silently thank my ex-wife for insisting that I learn to dance. The next dance was slow, and I was a little surprised when she pressed her lush body against me. Her hair smelled like white lilies, and I chuckled to myself because that perfume wasn't too popular with young women. We actually talked for a bit as we glided across the dance floor. I learned that her name was Kathleen Franks. She was the bride's aunt and the band's chaperone. She thanked me for dancing and started to leave the dance floor after a slow dance, but I took her hand and invited her to join me at the bar. She started to protest that she needed to keep an eye on her girls, but I pointed out to her that she could see them just fine from my seat at the bar. We watched the young women and talked. I learned that she was actually 48 years old and divorced after 15 years of marriage. She told me that her husband, a man of means, had traded her for a trophy wife who was 27 against his 48 when he married her 3 years ago. She also told me that her outfit had been chosen for her by her niece, the bride, and that she felt it was a bit youthful for her as she usually dressed more conservatively. I expressed my opinion that her outfit suited her perfectly, and I was completely giddy when I told her that I absolutely loved her sexy heels. I learned years ago that women seem to really like it when their shoes are praised. "Don't you think I look inappropriate in this outfit?" she asked innocently. "Not in the slightest. I'm sorry to say this, but you look good enough to eat you up. If I liked the pink blush before, now I liked the dark red blush she demonstrated." We talked for about 15 minutes. She noticed that I wasn't wearing a wedding ring and wanted to know the story. She expressed surprise when I told her that my ex-wife had never actually cheated on me physically. "I'm really old-fashioned," I explained. "She had cheated on me emotionally and planned to do it physically. I couldn't trust her anymore. You don't tell someone you love them, but you want to have sex with someone else." "I understand that," she replied. Everyone should have a line in the sand. After a few minutes, she went back to the bridal table, but was more than receptive when I asked her to dance again about 30 minutes later. This time, when we were done, she took my hand and led me back to the table with the other women, which now had several other men at it. From my point of view, the evening was a success, even though the young women were a bit rowdy. I was very surprised when Kathy invited me to be her date to her wedding in 2 weeks. "I was going to go alone, but I know I'd rather spend time with you. I know we just met, but you've already met a lot of girls who will be there too," she said. "Besides, you'd be doing me a big favor because I wouldn't be there alone and I wouldn't look really pathetic. I certainly wouldn't want you to look pathetic. I'd be more than happy to accompany you to the wedding," I said. "Tell me what color you'll be wearing and I'll pick out the suit I have that goes best with it." She leaned toward me and gave me a quick peck on the lips. "Ooh la la la," came a chorus from across the table. I smiled radiantly while Katie blushed again. I could get used to this. I sat with Kathy when we weren't dancing. During one of those moments when we were sitting at the table, I kept my eyes on the girls at the bachelorette party, some of whom were clearly overindulging in alcohol. I'm the father of a teenage girl, so it wasn't unusual for me to be in dad mode with the young women around me. When I saw a young man take one of the girls by the arm and begin to lead her toward the restrooms, I excused myself, got up from the table, and quickly and quietly made my way toward them, reaching them just before the guy was about to push the girl into the men's room. The young man looked at me with disdain, obviously not intimidated by the older guy in the shirt and tie. I admit that I'll never scare anyone at first sight, but I'd like to think that I'm still in good physical shape, and I got into quite a bit of trouble as a kid. Sometimes you have to be willing to do some violence to do the right thing, which in this case meant protecting some young girl from becoming this guy's sex toy. I would hope that someone would step in and protect my little girl if the situation called for it. "Let go of my hand and get away from me, old man," he growled at me. "She's old enough to play if she wants to." I let go of his hand, but with my other hand I grabbed his head and slammed it hard against the wall on the side of the door. I pushed him hard enough to break the drywall, smashing his face bloody and stunning him. Suddenly he stopped seeming so cocky and let go of the girl. He also seemed to no longer want this disagreement. The club became quiet as people realized what had just happened. Just as I started to lead Alicia back to the bachelorette party, Katie and the rest of the group came over to us, grabbed the woman, and led her back to the table. I was left facing the restaurant manager and another employee. I thought I was in trouble until the manager reached out to me and thanked me for helping the young woman. "The police were called. This guy is going to jail. They will probably need your information and your side of the story, but I don't think you have anything to worry about. By the way, drinks for the rest of the evening are on the house. Thanks again," he said. "Wow, that was some crazy shit," Wanda, the bride-to-be, said as I walked back to the table. "Thank you for paying attention. Not just Aunt Kathy." "How did you see that?" Katie asked me. I was supposed to be the chaperone, and I had no idea what was going on. I feel pretty awkward about it. "It's not your fault. It's easy to lose sight of 14 girls in a bar unless you're a professional security guard or a father. Fathers, at least most of us, have what I call fatherly vision. I chatted and snacked with the women at the table until they decided to leave and spend the rest of the evening somewhere else. I kissed Katie gently on the lips as we said goodnight to each other, feeling pretty good and having her number in my phone. "Get a room!" one of the girls said to the husky laughter of the group. I licked my lips gently and tasted Katie's lipstick as I watched the women leave the restaurant. I carried my drink back to the seat at the bar I had occupied earlier. "Looks like you did pretty well," the bartender grinned as I sat back down. "Who knew?" I replied with a laugh. "Girls' night out? Give me one for the road so I can celebrate my good fortune before I go." My new best friend, bartender Sean, earned himself a double shot of whiskey as a tip for the evening. Katie's dress for the wedding was light blue, so I wore my navy blue pinstripe suit, which I consider my in-room-for-myself suit. I thought we made a beautiful couple, as did several of her relatives at the wedding. Several people came up to me at the wedding and thanked me for looking out for Alicia. Apparently, the bride had spent the previous 2 weeks telling anyone who would agree to listen that I was some sort of hero. "Heroic and handsome, what a wonderful combination," said Kathy's sister, Donna Fulham, the bride's mother, as she came over to introduce herself to me before the wedding. "Thank you for helping the girls a couple weeks ago and for making my sister look like she has improved taste in men. I also got to meet Katie's 24-year-old daughter, Marissa, and her fiancé, Ben." "Well, at least one of my parents isn't begging for dates in elementary school," Marissa said upon meeting me. "Dad's sure to hate you if you stick around long enough to be introduced." By the time the reception was over, I knew Katie and I would go the distance. A month later, I introduced her to my children. My son quickly bonded with her, and my daughter was a little reserved. She was still a little angry at me for divorcing her mother, even though Mom didn't even cheat on you. However, my son understood that. He had a serious girlfriend, and one evening we had an in-depth discussion about fidelity and what it meant to each of us. Epilogue. My wife Kathy and I retired a few years ago. We celebrated our anniversary with an Alaskan cruise. With a daily dose of Cialis and Astroglide, we make love every morning before we shower and get on with our lives. At our age, it's more about connecting than sex. All 3 of our children are married and thriving. We have a total of 6 grandchildren. I've only talked to my ex-wife maybe a couple dozen times since our divorce, counting our children's weddings and Christmas vacations. She was married and divorced for the 2nd time. My kids tell me she blames me for her life being the way it is. "I never really cheated on him," she still tells them. "Some people just don't get it."